And Trump's 2020 re-election, I think it's never looked better after the events of today. Victor Davis Hanson and Mercedes Schlapp will tell us why. But first, basic, fundamental, and serious errors. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, if you walk by a TV today, you may have thought that someone had messed with your DVR, that you were watching impeachment hearings from last week. Judiciary Committee Chair Jerry Nadler presided over what can only be described as a televised competitor to Ambien. Okay? Politicians questioning lawyers about stuff they were thinking and doing as they were doing the investigation of the Ukraine impeachment investigation. But I have a question. Where was the original inquisitor, the ultimate witness? Well, he was nowhere to be found.
Where is he?
I don't know where he is. He found us.
He must have friends.
Friends? What this guy?
Oh, Adam Schiff. He's like the kid who kind of pulls the fire alarm and then skips out on the rest of the day at school. Yet even without him today, there were a few very amusing flashpoints at this sideshow hearing.
How many subpoenas were issued to AT&T?
I don't know.
Maybe your chairman could be here to actually answer this. Who ordered to find out if Nunez's number was on those calls? Be careful, you're under oath.
I know I'm under oath, sir.
Then answer the question.
Matter. And I will answer the question, if you give me a second here.
How did you include it in the report? After not saying anything else about this?
Well, I'm not going to get into the deliberations of our investigation.
And that's the problem. I'm done with you for right now. We're done.
Goldman turned a whiter shade of white there. He says he pale as a ghost. Well, that was about as close as you get to exciting what was otherwise a Judiciary Committee run by the politically and ethically impaired. If the ratings were lame for Fiona Hill and Ambassador Sondland, they weren't any better for a bunch of no-name attorneys that actually work for the committee. Now, another issue. Now, it's time to separate fact from fiction on the Inspector General report. As predicted, Democrats are hailing the release as a big relief and a vindication. Don't believe that for a nanosecond. In fact, the report, as I mentioned to Hannity, is a devastating indictment of our FBI and our intel gathering apparatus. It exposes the use and abuse of confidential human sources and in excruciating detail. I'm not kidding about footnote 473. In footnote after footnote, we see that our surveillance state was being used to troll a political presidential campaign. And it was a campaign, of course, that scared every member of the D.C. establishment for what it stood for. Now, the report paints such a damning picture of the FBI's conduct in opening this investigation into the Trump campaign that even NBC's chief legal reporter couldn't spin it otherwise.
The FBI basically repeatedly screwed up at every level, failing to pay enough attention to potential problems with Steele, failing to tell the Justice Department. And it says at one point that the FBI decided to seek this FISA warrant, even at the risk of being criticized for doing it later. The Inspector General report says the FISA application was, in many ways, inaccurate, incomplete, or unsupported.
Other than that, it's perfectly fine to destroy people's lives and trigger an ongoing investigation that dragged the country through this nonsense for 2 years. Now, although Horowitz inexplicably found no evidence of political bias in the FBI's decision to surveil the Trump campaign, I'm going to get to that later, he laid out at least, and I'm saying at least 17 major problems with the FBI's use of FISA warrants. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants. Now, remember, the reason that many of us said that the entire Mueller investigation itself was tantamount to being the fruit of the poisonous tree was because, as Horowitz is now concluding, the first warrant filed with the secret FISA court was almost entirely reliant on the discredited Steele dossier. Now, although that's not what the anti-Trump coalition has been saying, of course, for the last 2 years.
The Steele dossier only made a very small part of what the FBI used to get permission to surveil Carter Page.
The FBI only used a very small part of the Steele dossier.
It accurately reflected what we knew about Mr. Steele.
There was a significant amount of additional material about Page, and the dossier was part of that, but was not all of it or a critical part of it.
It's complete lies. Horowitz notes The receipt of Steele's election reporting on September 19, 2016, played a central and essential role. Read it again. Central and essential role for Jim Comey, if he's a little slow tonight, in the FBI's and department's decision to seek the FISA order, despite the fact that the FBI obtained additional information raising significant questions about the reliability of the Steele election reporting. Are you see what I'm saying? They knew that the Steele stuff was bogus, or at least very weak, yet they still went for it. The IG also found that the FBI failed to disclose that information that, quote, was inconsistent with or undercut the assertions contained in the FISA applications and, of course, thus resulted in inaccurate information being included in the applications. Okay, what's that FISA judge thinking tonight? Now, this includes, by the way, information that Carter Page had been working with a U.S. intel agency, likely the CIA, for years. That's what he gets rewarded with, an investigation after he's been helping the CIA for years. So what happened? Well, instead, that exonerating fact was edited out of an email by FBI lawyer Kevin Kleinsmith, who also, along with Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, was taken off the Russia probe once their anti-Trump biases were made public. Now, I know you're probably asking what I've been asking myself all day. How could an impartial investigator, you're the Inspector General, it's your lifetime goal to be an Inspector General, looking at all the facts, all the text messages, the exculpatory and the damning information, both that were left out in key places, the sheer volume of informants and agents involved in Crossfire Hurricane, how can you determine there was no political bias in the FBI's handling of the Russia probe? It defies not just common sense, but the evidence as Horowitz himself developed. Nevertheless, Horowitz gave Democrats the talking point they craved.
Distracted driving.
There was no treason, there was no conspiracy, there was no tapping of Trump's wires.
The investigation was not a coup or a coup attempt.
This report confirms that the predicate for the FBI's investigation was valid.
There was no political bias, no political motive. Doesn't surprise me at all. That's the FBI that I know and love.
The FBI you love was trolling for damaging information, trolling for sources, trolling for anything to fuel the phony Russia theories that were cooked up long before the summer of 2016. Democrats should not breathe a sigh of relief tonight. U.S. Attorney John Durham publicly came out to contest its findings, saying, based on the evidence collected to date, last month, we advised the Inspector General that we do not agree with some of the report's conclusions as to the predication and how the FBI case was opened. Attorney General Bill Barr also disagreed with the IG's conclusions, writing, the Inspector General's report now makes clear the FBI launched an intrusive investigation of a U.S. presidential campaign based on the thinnest of suspicions that, in my view, were insufficient to justify the steps taken. FBI officials misled the FISA court, omitted critical exculpatory facts from their findings, and suppressed or ignored information negating the reliability of their principal source. The bottom line is that the forthcoming Durham report, which the Attorney General has been assisting him on, is far more comprehensive in scope. We're going to learn, I think, a lot more in the coming months.